On January 17, 2026, President Donald Trump escalated his bid to acquire Greenland by announcing new tariffs on 8 NATO allies that have opposed his plan. The tariffs are intended as leverage to force Denmark into a deal for the complete and total purchase of the territory. The tariff schedule. The administration plans to implement the tariffs on all goods imported to the U.S. from the targeted nations. February 1, 2026, an initial 10% tariff begins. June 1, 2026, the rate increases to 25% if a deal has not been reached. Targeted NATO allies. The 8 countries facing these specific tariffs are Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and the Netherlands. The president specifically targeted these nations after they deployed small contingents of troops to Greenland. For Arctic endurance, a Danish-led military exercise, Trump described the troop deployment as a dangerous game that justifies economic retaliation. International reactions. The announcement has sparked a severe diplomatic crisis within NATO and the European Union. On January 18, leaders of the 8 targeted nations issued a joint statement warning that the tariffs risk a dangerous downward spiral and undermine transatlantic relations. The European Union is considering deploying its anti-coercion instrument, often called the trade bazooka, which would allow the bloc to retaliate with its own tariffs, investment restrictions, and export controls. Retaliatory tariffs could target roughly $93 billion worth of American goods. Defiance Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen and Greenlandic Prime Minister Jens Frederik Nielsen have both stated that Europe will not be blackmailed and that Greenland is not for sale. In a show of sovereignty, Denmark announced it would send a substantial number of additional combat soldiers to Greenland. On January 19, 2026, domestic perspective. The move has faced bipartisan criticism. In Congress, senators from both parties warned that the tariffs would raise costs for American families and businesses, while potentially helping adversaries like Russia and China by dividing the NATO alliance. Current polls suggest that only 17% of Americans support taking Greenland by force or coercion. As of January 19, 2026, the standoff between the United States and its European allies over Greenland has escalated into a major diplomatic and economic crisis following President Trump's latest actions. Key new developments. The Nobel snub justification. In a series of extraordinary text messages released by Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre today, President Trump explicitly linked his aggressive push for Greenland to his perceived snub by the Nobel Peace Prize committee. He wrote that, because Norway decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize, he no longer feels obligated to think purely of peace and can instead focus on what is good and proper for the U.S. Refusal to rule out force. When asked today if he would consider military force to seize the territory, President Trump responded, "No comment. This follows White House statements that all options are on the table for the acquisition." Mass protests in Nuuk on January 17, 2026. Large-scale protests erupted in Greenland's capital, Nuuk, with citizens carrying signs reading "Greenland is not for sale" and rejecting U.S. threats. Proposed direct payments. Reports indicate the Trump administration is exploring offering direct lump sum payments of up to $100,000 to each of Greenland's 57,000 residents to incentivize succession from Denmark in favor of a closer relationship with the U.S. European retaliation strategy. European leaders are coordinating a united, clear response to what they have termed economic blackmail. The trade bazooka. The European Union is seriously considering activating its anti-coercion instrument for the first time. This would allow the bloc to retaliate with tariffs on roughly $93 billion of U.S. imports, targeting specific industries like bourbon, aircraft components, and soybeans. Restrictions on foreign direct investment and access to EU public procurement contracts. Emergency summit. European Council President Antonio Costa has called for an extraordinary meeting of all 27 EU leaders in Brussels this Thursday to finalize these countermeasures. NATO diplomatic surge. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte is scheduled to meet with Danish and Greenlandic officials today to discuss Arctic security, and the rift with Washington. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has publicly condemned the tariffs as completely wrong.